Hey, good afternoon, good evening, or whenever you happenstance across this truth bomb. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm coming to you on April 7th, which is a Friday, 2023 at 4:30 p.m. my time. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than what I normally do because I tend to riff and just go off whatever's in my mind, and I just try to keep up with, my thoughts to try to incorporate what I know in context to what's happening, to try to get people to understand the magnitude of the revelations. But today I got to do it slightly differently because I'm not sure if this is the end of the line or the beginning of the next chapter. But I'm going to I've scripted this truth bomb, and it's just simply a continuation of what I said the other day that really everything is on the line. And I think the way I want to start is that imagine you were at the beginning of World War II, or maybe the morning of 9/11, and what I'm telling you could save your life and others from the catastrophe that's about to unfold. Would you listen? Well, only if you understood what I said was true, but you can only know that from happenstance looking backwards, right? So, since that's an impossibility, I'll just ask you to please believe me. Believe in whatever this is, whether it's faith, I don't know. But all I have to do is I've got to ask you to trust me. And in that vein, if you don't mind me asking you, because this is going to be a little bit lengthy, please turn off the noise in your life that's in your head. And it's a big ask because we all have important things to do, but I promise you that we will save everything that matters while defeating everything that is destroying us if I am successful in bringing us all together. I'm hopeful, and in my own way, I'll pray that this finds its way to 1,300 of you who will be the first to join us in a step into history to defeat the poison of the wicked, to usher in a monumental awakening. I'm guessing it's going to take a miracle, but sometimes you got to say, what the fuck, and take your shot. I was searching earlier today for what happened on this day in history to see if I could get a read or a sign or anything that had specific measure, tone, gravity of what it is that I'm trying to get across to you. And nothing of too much import jumped out at me, but a few interesting things came my way. The first was the anniversary of the death of the legendary investigative journalist on 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace. It's also the death of Henry Ford. But interestingly, and more relevant to what it is I'm trying to reveal to you, it was also the birth of legendary filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola. I found that fitting given what I'll reveal to you at the end, but probably the most relevant of today is that it is the anniversary of the birth or the birthday of supposedly Buddha, which would make a lot of sense. And I don't know if I can find the right tone, but because I was suffering greatly, I'm trying to concentrate on reading this and trying to get you the right words. But yesterday was a day of really deep sorrow for me. It was weird because I was in this place of uncertainty throughout the day, as I frequently am. And I had just reacted to the podcast by Jon Stewart that I couldn't hold back on. So I just riffed it out and I laid it down in yesterday's monumental truth bomb with the proclamation that everything is on the line, because it is. But, it was cool because it got a little bit of traction. But, I think as of this viewing, I think I pushed play. I think it had 64 views versus, considering the information I have, it literally has to reach tens of millions. So I don't know. Please hit like, hit subscribe. Please share this with as many people as you can. And hopefully I'll be effective at explaining to you why that matters. It's interesting because right before I hit this, I came to see something that's also a topic of this, because Matt Taibbi just revealed, ironically, that Twitter, of all things, in the midst of the Twitter files, that he might have just gotten thrown under the bus. And to me, that means there's no question that the Borg is on play by my rules or get the fuck off sort of thing. And it's going to take you believing in me or a miracle to punch through this massive veil of tyranny in technical deception, because that's what's, I think, holding us back. It could be so much more. First, I got to shift tone because I got to really think about this. Look, man, yesterday was a tough day for me, a really tough day. Um, I'm experiencing deep sadness and grief and suffering because my beloved family member, Roxy, passed from this earth. We got Roxy back in 2008. My son was 4 years old. And unbeknownst to me, we were all on the precipice of experiencing an earth-challenging, changing, cataclysmic event that would change my life forever, and of course, millions of your lives. Roxy grew into a tenacious and a spirited cat that imbued this incredible sense of love and devotion and loyalty amidst what was this incredibly fierce confidence. Her eyes were so piercing. I remember the years of her sitting in my office and on my lap while I raked my mind over this data and the findings that would ultimately define this journey and the work that we've done. But she did so with this impeccable presence that enveloped my very being. When I was with her in between travels and throughout good and bad times, which there were more than I could ever possibly count, she was always, always present. She was always my Roxy. My life the past 2 years has been as tumultuous as when she entered our lives, maybe even more so. But again, she was simply what she was. Throughout it all, she was a poetic and a mysterious, brilliant being in this package that just expressed truth and love. A couple of months ago, she fell ill. I'd kind of said my goodbyes then, and then miraculously she bounced back, and we had her for like the last 2 months, and I tried to spend as much time with her as I could, but unfortunately, she took a quick and a dramatic turn for the worse about a week ago, and within that short time, Roxy succumbed to the world that she gracefully navigated all the years, and she died in my arms with a beam of sunlight pouring over her face yesterday at about 5 p.m. my time. It was the end of a beautiful run. I'm devastated. But it's also a reminder of the fleeting reality I think that we're all susceptible to. And time is of the essence. I can't believe it's been 15 years since she entered my life because of everything that's happened since. Seems to have gone by in an eye blink. But it got me to thinking about my own mortality and who I am and what I'm doing and why, or whether or not what I'm doing actually means anything. You know, I was considering last night, as I was thinking about the time period of Roxy's existence, and it was just kind of dumbstruck. I was dumbstruck by the notion that I was born in 1968, which was only 23 years removed from the death of Adolf Hitler and the fall of the Third Reich. I considered Hitler's rise and fall, and really all of it was in the span of 20 years from the First World War and all the calamity and the tragic destruction between those periods. And I considered the aftermath of World War II and the glorious period of the American century, but of course you have to acknowledge the tumult of the Cold War and the Civil Rights era and Vietnam and all of that chaos that of course culminated with the assassination of JFK, RFK, and MLK. And then I considered my own run that really began for me on 9/11, but it didn't come into stark focus until the period of my Roxy. And I'm left wondering if it was all for naught, or if I press on, and if so, to what ends. The past 20 years seems like an eye blink. If anything, my Roxy will hold constant vigilance throughout her hypnotic gaze in my conscience to be wary of time, because from where I'm sitting, I'm not sure how much time we have left. I was seriously considering up on this crusade, my friends. I mean it. I've been on this goddamn never-ending monumental journey. First, trying to answer the questions that didn't make any sense hidden under this mountain of hell, And now, as I have all the answers, I'm asking the questions of how in the hell is it possible that what we've done is still not penetrating into the headspace of the millions who need to understand this? I considered the tens of thousands of hours that I put into this work, the millions of dollars necessary to put it all together, the miracles and the tragedies that we had to endure and overcome to finish the task. And then in the end, when we put it out in the world responded with silence. As demonstrated by the last year and a half by my truth bombs, they were more of an expression of I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. And I probably put another 1,000 hours, nearly 3,000 hours, I think, in revealing the answers to what millions are searching for, and everyone in media and independent media especially seem to grapple with every day, but they all walk past it. They all walk over it. They walk through it, and that's because of the point of everything. Everyone and everything who is in the business to reveal things to you does so from a position of utter insanity, trying to chase whatever maybe the news cycle might be and their spin on it in the midst of their brand that walks with the political equivalent, that everyone who has a voice does so because they found a toehold based on some formula that speaks to the segmented audience through which the media vectors give the people what they want, but without a broader understanding of what is without the facts. And what I'm revealing to you is simply the emperor's new clothes on a monumental scale that is dangerously close to exploding in one way or another. And if and when it does, it's going to be because millions of you aren't listening or getting what it is that I'm revealing to you to stop it. I've done the work that the sum total of our regulatory bodies and enforcement agencies failed to do. People, we're talking about something along the lines of $100 billion a year in budget to all of the above that have failed to deliver a society premised on the rule of law, the truth that makes it all so, none of which exists today. I dare go so far as to say that given everything I have experienced, the truth I've discovered is a truth that literally has no value. And what does that mean? Well, for me, it's a sickness that can envelop the body and kill it just as suddenly as the cancer that developed my dear Roxy. And then, in an eye blink, it's over. The question I continue to grapple with is, does life have a purpose when all that seems to have value are lies? I'm reminded of Jon Snow's understated climatic proclamation. Before I had my world stop dead in its tracks yesterday as I held my Roxy, I was grappling with the consternation knowing that for whatever reason, be it people's attention span, the interests, algorithms, time availability, overwhelming noise and misinformation and manipulation, that what I'm attempting to do is simply an impossibility. But in the span of a few hours yesterday, as I was dealing with Roxy passing away in my arms, the following occurred. First, African American legislators in the body of the House of Representatives of the Tennessee State House courageously and emotionally demanded the end of the insanity by the unregulated purchases of military-grade weapons that can be purchased by deranged individuals that murder our children. The protesters chanted fascist to the mostly white Republican Tennessee House of Representatives in what to me looked like an encapsulation of the whole. A majority of multi-ethnic people demanding democracy to a mostly white body of legislatures taking their cues from corporate sponsors in a real-time demonstration of the perversion of minority rule. It's the perversion of democracy. It's a betrayal, and we're all looking at it. And for those of you who have been paying attention, I have been saying ad nauseum for months that corruption births and fuels fascism. But consider the predictable framing by MSNBC later last night during the broadcast. One of which was I saw scripted for Alex Wagner as she read a teleprompter, ironically like I'm doing now, but it was a pronouncement in the majority sentiment involving gun reform and abortion as she intuited that the powerful influences of the gun lobby had an outsized influence on the white Republicans in context to the KKK's history in Tennessee. While I was aligned with the arguments being all in on this ending this ridiculous non-regulated military-grade purchase that enables the tragedies to befall this nation with increasing brutal regularity, I found it once again reflective of the MSNBC brand, given what it is that they won't reveal. Their safe place hides what I'm revealing to you. Concurrently, a perfect example came in the form of the equal outrage of the revelations of ProPublica, featuring a feature that exposed Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his wife Ginny Thomas accepting lavish gifts in the form of personalized vacations that sent the Thomases on incredible global excursions on a private jet to some of the world's most exclusive destinations. Not only is it unethical, but as it turns out, it's illegal. These favors came via Dallas business billionaire, a top Republican donor by the name of Harlan Crow. He comes across to me as an understated Donald Trump, and the outrage that was all over the place on social media, especially coming from the likes of AOC and others of her ilk, were some kind of surprise. And I'm like, what? Where have you been the last 2 years, considering it was revealed that the Koch brothers have been funneling money to the Thomases via Ginny Thomas, Clarence's wife, both of who participated and played a role in subverting SCOTUS's view as it related to the January 6th insurrection. In this case, corruption is so out in the open, it's amazing that we haven't had a revolution or at least millions of protesters in the streets on just this issue. But things move so fast in so many directions, it's hard for people to get a grasp of anything, let alone something as important as the revelations that billionaires can directly lavish the kingly lifestyle on a Supreme Court justice. And you might wonder, why might they do that? Well, you can bet your sweet ass that Trump wasn't leaving it up to fate as he steamrolled the likes of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Barrett into the Supreme Court. Do I have to ask you what the outcome of that was? It seems like MSNBC has already forgotten, but the most prescient point of all, considering MSNBC and AOC's disingenuous identity politics at play, the way I see the reality is not too dissimilar to what we saw when women executives were complicit in the Weinstein rape machine. The perversion of our systems animated by Clarence Thomas is the unfortunate fact that he isn't the only African American man getting his piece from the corporate trough. What do you think Barack Obama and Eric Holder were and are? Look, I'll give you this nugget to chew on. Yeah, Donald Trump was indicted this week on 34 felonies involving falsifying business records while making $130,000 in illegal hush money payments to a porn star. And yes, Clarence Thomas probably was gifted north of $500,000 from a Republican tycoon in real estate, whom it might be safe to assume makes a hefty figure from not having the law up his ass. But should they all go down for the crimes they are guilty of? Fuck yeah, they should. You bet your ass they should. But what I'm revealing to you in comparison to Obama and Holder was that what they let Wall Street get away with destroyed 50 million plus Americans whose lives were devastated through financial terrorism, through the goddamn corrupt courts that used tens of millions of illegal documentation fraud to rip millions of people's lives apart, that led to the Wall Street getting away with $29 trillion and no fucking prosecutions because they covered it up. And yeah, MSNBC, they were African Americans getting their piece that aren't a part of your identity politics brand. From where I'm sitting, their failure is exactly what made Trump possible. Once again, I will remind you, corruption births and fuels fascism, and my friends, to ignore it is to fuel it. If that weren't enough validation for one day, then came the pictures I saw on Twitter yesterday where someone showed protesters firebombing offices in Paris, and amidst the flames and the flares, I saw that it read BlackRock offices. I paused for a moment, and you could have heard a record scratch. It was surreal because of the profound implications if it were true. I had to search around and I had to find out whether or not it was, and indeed it was. And the French are in something like day 10 of this massive popular unrest where the police are in the same stance as our cops during Occupy Wall Street, although I think they're even more brutal. I think the violence has been quite extraordinary. But it's a very similar scenario to the police protecting the financial system. And here they were meeting the protesters as they firebombed and I think overwhelmed the police when they firebombed the BlackRock offices. And it was once this moment where they stormed the Bastille, but in context to everything that I've been telling you through these truth bombs for the past 13 months. Look, first you need to be aware that the French protests are as a result, of their being over themselves about pensions being reduced to basically deal with austerity because of budget cuts that aren't coming from the rich or the bankers. And as a result, they appropriately targeted, of course, the BlackRock offices. But what's incredible here is that the French government is forcing pensioners to lop off 2 years of their retirement to deal with the cost overruns by the French government, presumably framed the way Republicans frame Social Security and Medicare as social welfare. But aside from these programs being funded by the workers who paid into their programs their whole lives, the French citizens are saying fuck you to the Macron government for not cutting into the wealthiest of the French, who are presumably Macron's patronage. Not too dissimilar to my earlier references between the Koch brothers, the Mercers, and this Dallas magnate crave for Clarence Thomas, or of course Wall Street for both former President Barack Obama and of course former Attorney General Eric Holder, both of which made out like bandits for being able to cover up the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that destroyed millions, primarily 55% of African American household wealth that both betrayed. But in this instance, why it's so important to consider what I've been revealing to you that no one else will or has is the profound convergence of the anger of the French protests, why BlackRock was their target amidst what I've been revealing to you. How many of you remember, considering everything I've laid down, how BlackRock fits? Well, the sum total of my work that is laid out in the con at www.thecon.tv and the new Untouchables and the thousands of hours of truth bombs is the centerpiece of it all. What I continue to reveal to you is the biggest revelation of the past 75 years, since the time the Allies discovered and liberated the horrors of the concentration camps. What I have revealed to you is A, the entirety of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis was a criminal racket that destroyed 50 million Americans and tens of millions of more around the world through a criminal scheme that went global, that dominoed because of it was all built on a house of cards of fraud, and that house of cards fraud scheme was at such magnitude that it involved tens of millions of felonies. Look, some in the media like Jon Stewart and Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore, they all pretend to understand they understand what happened, but they don't. Not even on a rudimentary level. But look, guys, that's just the front side of the house. And the ultimate humdinger, mother of all what the fucks, is what I continue to reveal to you that no one else will. The Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally by the powers that be to backdoor $29 trillion in 2009 to the bankrupted financial system of Wall Street that destroyed a generation through the fraud that they created, but that never stopped. By my count, we're up to north of 60 trillion to the same system under the umbrella of the same con that looted from the full faith and credit of the United States to further enrich a global criminal racketeering scheme, which effectively enriched the top 1%. But to be more accurate, it's the top 0.001%. The reason why it's so profound that the French are now firebombing BlackRock is because former Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner during the Obama administration put Larry Fink and BlackRock in charge to administer the secret bailout that came from what I'm telling you through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, that in turn made BlackRock the most powerful company on earth. And as it turns out, Fink and Schwartzman from Blackstone were heavily involved in mortgage-backed securities that blew up the world in 2008. But why would that matter when Geithner gave him the keys, because Goldman was being targeted by Matt Taibbi, by the way, and let them, basically administer all of the emergency lending capacity. Let's just say that the investors or pensioners weren't their primary concern. So as I'm dealing with the passing of my beloved Roxy, and one day I see the protesters in Tennessee chanting fascist to the state legislator over the growing shadow of the history of the KKK, while ironically an African-American Supreme Court justice is on the take of white billionaires robbing the system, while media will not touch what I'm revealing to you about former President Barack Obama and former Attorney General Eric Holder. This, while BlackRock offices in Paris burn. Doesn't that just paint the entire picture? But wait, there's even more. If you've been paying attention to me, you know how disgusted I've been with the media writ large. You've heard me truth bomb on the monstrosity of Fox News, and it's self-evident and it's self-admitted via subpoenas in the Dominion Energy lawsuit business model is deception. And I personally love to see a massive protest in NYC at their headquarters where thousands sling shit on their office windows, because they've been slinging shit on the American people forever and getting away with it. As shit as Fox is, they're not the only ones. Some of you have heard me disparage Anderson, Zoolander, Cooper, and I think he is a complete joke as he ruminates useless rhetorical questions in the interviews that reveal absolutely nothing and cover up most things. That's not even to touch the stupidity of Don Lemon or the betrayal of the likes of Jeff Zucker, who turned Trump into a Godzilla. Same goes for Les Moonves, who was at CBS. But my ultimate criticism of the media has always been Rachel Maddow. I know she's incredibly smart, she's witty, she's got a ton of resources, and she gets paid $30 million a year to hide everything I'm telling you. She may not actually be hiding it per what she's demonstrated in an interview with Warren a few weeks ago in the midst of the global bank runs. She seems to be genuinely ignorant, and she said it herself, that she doesn't get the whole financial corruption story. I think it's a stretch, but oh well. It would certainly make all of the rest of it make sense. To me, the ultimate tell was yesterday, further revelation by the indie journalist extraordinaire Matt Taibbi, who in a Substack article proclaimed MSNBC to be his enemy. This in light of an interview that he did yesterday with Mehdi Hassan on MSNBC. I've been a huge admirer of Taibbi since his days at Rolling Stone. He was truly a legend, especially on all things Wall Street. In my early days, I was just getting started on my journey, and I was trying very hard to land Taibbi to play the role in my work and to collaborate with him, but I just couldn't land him. And I ultimately had to simply be me in our work, in the kind. And we wound up going further than Taibbi ever did, but it has always left me scratching my head. At one point on a number of years back, Taibbi trailed off of his Wall Street corruption beat, if you want to call it that, and wound up covering Trump. Many of you may recall his book, Insane Clown President. Since I was so aware of all things Taibbi throughout this entire development, I kept scratching my head why he was going rogue, if you will. This move seemed to coincide with Taibbi's former boss and his best friend, who I'm also very close with, who also got, who I wouldn't say also, he got in trouble for a massive article of college gang rape at the University of Virginia because of a source who wasn't exactly credible. This person was let go from Rolling Stone after his heroic effort with Matt throughout the years of the vampire squid years and everything post-2008 financial crisis. But it wasn't too long after that Matt Taibbi was having to defend himself against a lot of awkward allegations that came out of his time being a journalist in Russia, in his early days where he was more gonzo. He had a bent towards heroin usage and crazy hooker shit in Moscow. And when I was outside looking in, to me it looked like Taibbi got the message that his heroic take to take down Wall Street corruption was coming to an end. It looked to me like it played out that way because if you look in the Twitter files for what they are, it's important and it's good work to know that the government agencies like the CIA might be censoring social media in a variety of ways. But I'm convinced that I've been canceled because of all the information that I continue to reveal to the world that falls on deaf ears. But as was seemingly on display in this pretty interesting battle yesterday on MSNBC, Taibbi looks to me like he picked his lane. He got the safe way to a big audience with big money through whatever confluence his acceptance by the right is vis-a-vis Elon Musk and all things Republicans on the issue demonstrated by the Twitter files. And he does continue to stay on MSNBC's failure as it relates to Russiagate. But while Matt might be in the right to take down MSNBC on all the things related to the Clintons and the Steele dossier, as well as many of the revelations regarding the Twitter files, he's completely given up on what made him so excellent in the first place, which is financial corruption on a global scale, which even is more interesting when you consider his refusal to discuss the obvious between Trump and Putin and, of course, Deutsche Bank that connects them both. It's all just, to me, incredibly nauseatingly fucking stupid. The bottom line is he left the lane wide open for me to deliver it all to the world if I can manage to break through or stay breathing long enough to see the day. All of this is super ironic considering the only time I actually talked directly to Matt was after he landed on Joe Rogan, the first time he appeared on Joe Rogan. And he revealed on that show a lot of what we revealed on the con. He's been Rogan's guy ever since. And equally ironic, Matt got thrown under the bus by Twitter today, and I'm not sure whether or not to laugh about that. Further to the point, I learned yesterday that Russell Brand, in his own form on the same bullshit. Look, there was a time that I was heavily interested in Brand and in beating down the door to Russell's and Joe Rogan's, shows because I really thought that they were interested in finding the answers that they were presumably looking for. I've appreciated both for a long time, but I also took a massive issue with Rogan for Alex Jones, but also growing more and more by the day the criticism that I see in Brand, who seems to be chasing numbers on the right as well. How do I know? Well, his content reflects it all. He, like Rogan, tends to speak the language of the right and all of the hot button issues in that arena, and those people react and watch and drive numbers. And to that end, Taibbi locked up the space considering who he is in the Twitter files. And when you think about the algos, which means algorithms, of course, look, the brand numbers, I should say the numbers that he fiends on, almost like a drug, giving the audience what they want to hear. Just this week, Brand demonstrated once again that he literally has no workable knowledge of the corruption he pretends to drive to try to start a great awakening, while also talking about white supremacist talking points and what he's demonstrating in the case of the Dutch farmers. This is all blood and soil shit that the Nazis made central to their entire convergence. I mean, the same goes for Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald, who have played ball with Tucker Carlson, who's a stone's throw away from Bannon and all of this fourth turning shit. And we also see espoused by Putin. Look, it's all in the shadows, the paradigm that's building this global right-wing revolution that spans from the KKK's Make America Great Again to literally Nazi propaganda, and all of it circulated with the January 6th, inversion of what Carlson has been reformatting and cherry-picking to recreate the history that while MSNBC becomes the enemy of Taibbi. Not because of their cover-up of Wall Street, mind you, but for being on the opposite side of this movement, this movement and moment, where all the energy is for Taibbi, and I dare say it's got to pay well. But who knows? So where does this all leave us? Well, I guess that leaves me at my closing argument. As I stipulated up front, corruption births fascism. I've sacrificed the last 13 years of my life crisscrossing this country and spending millions of dollars to get the answers to the goddamn questions I wasn't getting anywhere else. I had to understand the fucking racket, and I knew that buried me along with tens of millions of other people, and I had the insatiable desire to know how and why, and that led me to understand who covered it up. I asked a simple question. None of this makes sense. Until, of course, after this monumental odyssey, where I sacrificed my life to find the truth, and all that it encompasses now makes complete sense. Corruption has betrayed and undermined the entire system of our government that has created financial terrorism that destroyed my life and the tens of millions like me. I was nearly suicidal in 2009, but I pulled off a miracle that led to more miracles, and by the end, not only had I discovered the truth of it all, I literally had the evidence that could take down the entire machine. But in a cruel twist of fate, as much as communication is so much easier today than it was a half century ago, going back through the ages, to communicate today might be more perilous than any other time in history because the truth is drowned out by the ridiculous paradox of lies, algorithms, and overwhelming noise. I framed it like this on my Twitter feed yesterday. I borrowed the lyrics from one of my favorite songs that I believe framed my headspace, and see if you can identify what I'm expressing through the following. Went something like this. Is there anybody out there? Listen all y'all, it's a sabotage. We're sick and tired of the is and schism game. Die and go to heaven in Jesus' name, Lord. We know where we understand a mighty God is a living man. You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. So now you've seen the light. We've got to stand up for our rights. Finally, a peaceful place, so it appears from space. A closer look reveals the human race. So the kids, they dance and shake their bones, and the politicians throwing stones. And it's all too clear we're all our own, singing ashes, ashes, all fall down. And imagine a bright blue ball just spinning, spinning free, dizzying with possibility. Which brings me to my final point. Look, there's a highly resourceful and motivated white fascist movement that is moving in for the kill. The fact that the perverted, useless worm like Donald Trump could literally become the bearer of it all because of the clown he is, while Congress focuses the entire insurrection on his leadership, which is utterly ridiculous, could only be believed if Lucifer scripted this shit himself. To add further insult to injury, this movement has a massive anti-Semitic drumbeat to it. The replacement theory is anti-Semitism straight up, and the irony of it all is first, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and basically his business affiliation with the likes of Steve Mnuchin, both of whom are Jews, and their latest portrayal is their affiliation with the Crown of Saudi Arabia, whose fingerprints are all over 9/11. Remember, Trump said nobody ever got to the bottom of it, so what are you going to do? I can also tell you firsthand that the likes of Alan Greenspan, Robert Rubin, Sandy Weil, Arthur Levitt, Larry Fink, Stephen Schwartzman, Roland Arnall, Stephen Cohen, Lloyd Blankfein, Sheldon Adelson, Netanyahu, and many others that are all Jewish, and some of the very bankers that the financial system would be something that Nazis of the past would blame the collapse of the world on, but who are actually guilty of collapsing the world. This is a very dangerous reality given the rising xenophobia and anti-Semitism emerging from this fractured world that Trump is playing roulette with. But I have to make the most crucial point coming from where I'm coming from. As many of the bad guys that are guilty of corruption, criminality that destroyed the American dream in all of its facets are Jews, so too are the heroes in every direction that tried to stop them. Guys like Michael Winston, who tried to take down Angelo Mozillo and the bastards of Countrywide. Guys like Ira Weingold, who literally worked with Senator Barack Obama to write criminal legislation to end liars' loans and predation of minorities until, of course, Obama covered it all up. Guys like Mark Dan, who created the only RICO conviction for the crime that emulated exactly what Wall Street was doing on a global scale. And more close to home, guys like Adam Bronfman, who was my partner. Bronfman is from one of the most successful families in the history of the United States. They're mostly known for being one of the world's largest distilleries. In fact, I think they were the largest distillery for a very long time. But lesser known was the success of Adam's grandfather on his mother's side, whose name was Loeb, and Solomon Loeb, and he was a part of Kuhn Loeb, which is a highly important and successful investment bank at the time of the early 1900s, who became that way through an incredible fortitude and sacrifice and intelligence and street smarts that led them to being one of the most successful investment banks in New York at that time. And they were also involved with J.P. Morgan when they created the Federal Reserve. The Bronfmans owned a legendary building in Midtown Manhattan called the Seagram's Building. At one point, Goldman Sachs was in that building, and former Goldman CEO Sidney Weinberg, better known for his ethos of long-term greedy, which is just the opposite of the giant vampire squid, which is the opposite of don't fuck. I mean, it's what am I trying to say? It was everything is committed to your clients. Don't fuck your clients. What an amazing turnaround at that firm. The building also housed the legendary Four Seasons restaurant, which Adam was a partner in. It was the ultimate gathering spot for Wall Street's power players at power lunches. I didn't know all of this information when I went to Adam originally. When I took him to lunch, and all I had was $57 in my bank account, I barely had enough to cover the bill. It wasn't long after until Adam invited me I don't even know what I'm trying to say here because I know this story inside and out. Why am I reading? It wasn't long until Adam invited me back to his house and he said to me, look, man, if you can find a way to figure out how we became a country from, of, by, and for the people to of, by, and for the corporation, I'm in. And how fast can you start? Within a couple of weeks, my colleague Eric Vaughn and I hit the road to surf the Occupy Wall Street movement from coast to coast, and we landed in Zuccotti Park the day the NYPD came down hard on it, not unlike what was happening in France today. Our journey started 13 years ago. The only reason I could get these answers of how the Federal Reserve was hijacked by corruption to guarantee the largest criminal conspiracy in history was because the grandson of one of the founders of the Federal Reserve, who was also Wall Street royalty, that would later provide tens of millions to Harvard Law, allowed me to do so. It was a miracle. It was a miracle that we pulled this off. We have all the answers for all the world to see. But soon enough, it's going to be erased from history because it costs real money to keep this going, and there's no market for the truth. There's no value for the truth. Like Fox and everyone else I have talked about has demonstrated, the business model is deception. The business model is lies. It's so completely fucked up, this has to be the end of the world. Look, I laid it on the line to find truth because my entire being has been committed to the American dream from my earliest days. When I had my bar mitzvah at the age of 13, I stood at the pulpit before my family and God, and I gave a speech that honesty is the most important value any of us have. That honesty is how good work happens. That honesty is how honor is achieved. That it's what gives our lives meaning and purpose. It's what gives this life value. But here I am on the other side of this at the age of 54, and I'm asking myself, maybe I got it wrong. Tell me, people, is the world of lies what we deem value? Is that what God values? Is everything a lie that has worth and the truth means nothing? When I made my first lap across the country, I remember thinking to myself as I laid in the mud of the downed Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. My partner Eric thought I had lost my mind, and he thought I turned into Colonel Kurtz, reverting back to the fact that today is the birthday of none other than legendary filmmaker who created, of course, Apocalypse Now, which is just amazing. But as I covered myself in the mud soil, the sacred ground, as what we approached the end of the yellow brick road with DC and NYC on the horizon, as it turns out, that was just the beginning of my journey. But that's when it occurred to me that there are two columns of our soul. On one pole, you have character, integrity, dignity, and honesty. And on the other, we have hypocrisy, duplicity, and complicity. I saw the truth there right before me while I was covered in the mud of Flight 93, and I never looked back. Look, truth be told, I'm not a very religious person, particularly as it relates to the adherence to rigid structure. I'm definitely a spiritual person, completely astonished by the miracle of the Big Bang, the genius of universe, and the miracle of life, especially those that are in my life that I love so much, including my Roxy. I am, however, incredibly committed to the story of Moses and the liberation of the Israelites from bondage through Exodus that doesn't really come together until Deuteronomy and the Promised Land that Moses never reached. The summation of the story outside of irony, that freedom from bondage can only thrive with the integrity of justice and law. Without that, you have the pharaohs. But I am equally fascinated by Jesus' journey to crucifixion. Jesus was, of course, a rabbi, and from what I understand, a radical one at that. He journeyed to Jerusalem, as we all know, in his first pilgrimage, his final pilgrimage, to, among other things, challenge the corrupt authority. One of the parables is throwing out the money changers. And to be quite frank with you, I was stunned recently that Marjorie Taylor Greene correctly identified the Romans for having crucified Jesus. In light of everything else that I've discussed here and everything that's going on, I'm actually shocked that could have gone a completely different direction. But the point I'm making is that it was through the inspiration of Moses, through Exodus, which was rebellion, and I'm well aware it's a mythical one at that, against the tyranny of Pharaoh. And as the story goes, it was no easy task to get the slaves motivated to break the chains of bondage after 400 years, even with God's might on display for all to see. Nevertheless, there was Jesus 3,000 years later, funneling the sanctity of covenant between God and his people as the crucible that he carried forth, a great turmoil, pain, and sacrifice to once again liberate the people from the bondage of tyranny and corruption, inspired by Exodus into resurrection. The story is time immemorial, time eternal, and here we find ourselves again 2,000 years later. I have spent the last 13 years of my life on a journey to redemption. I knew the system was pissing on my head, telling me it was rain. And for whatever reason, my DNA is built up with the tenacity and the fortitude and the purpose of integrity. And miraculously, I was able to discover all that I had sought. And while the journey provided me redemption in so many ways, in the end, it feels as if the truth is forsaken. I've been carrying this heavy burden for a long time. I have sacrificed all that I have to make you clear on what is and what we are right here, right now, how and why. I don't know if this is the end of my journey. I don't know if this is the beginning of the next phase, but I am trying with everything I have to connect with you, to merge with you, to join forces, to help me pick up this burden and elevate it above the ocean of polluted madness and deception that is destroying us all. I like to think of this as the righteous grind, but my purpose is to break the chains of bondage leading us to Exodus that leads to the resurrection of the American dream. I have a dream to defeat the wickedness of betrayal and tyranny, to usher in the new era of enlightenment. If any of this is connecting, if any of this is resonating, please invest in this crusade, not as an act of charity, but an act of your skin in the game, an investment of $13 in the spirit of this journey and the peculiar alignment it has to the story of the original 13 colonies that found the fortitude and the courage to unite, to purge tyranny, to devise liberty and justice for all in order to form a more perfect union. The job has been handed to us. Right now, evil, twisted billionaires are continuing to spend billions to corrupt the fuck out of everything and everyone. We are the only hope to stand in their way if we can rise as one. The sacrifices of history cannot be forsaken, neither can this journey. We cannot allow evil to prevail. That is all this is about. Good must triumph over evil. I have the truth that reveals the central tumor that has metastasized into our body of democracy, and it will kill us as fast as my poor dear Roxy had succumbed to cancer in my arms as the light passed from her face in the shadow of the setting sun. I don't know why there's all of these 13 references. But I can tell you, ironically and interestingly, that the number 13 means revolution. It also means the principles of God. It was Federal Reserve 13.3 that illegally showered trillions on the demons in the shadows that betrayed us all. They are collectively flying the planes into the towers by automated pilot, and we're all passengers. It's time to get up. On top of everything else, we risk yet another anti Semitic disaster on top of the other crises we are all engaged in. It's incredible for me to see the Israelites swelling, the Israelis, I said Israelites, swelling to the streets in their own populism to purge corruption right in front of our eyes now. It's the same story throughout history. None of this can be a coincidence, can it? I'm giving you all that I have. And I'm saying a prayer that 1,300 of you will rise to the occasion, lock arms with me, invest $13 into this populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption. If we could get to 1,300, we'll get to 13 million. If you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, that believes in dignity, integrity, liberty, and sustainability, merge through unity, we will defeat tyranny to realize our destiny. A clean new deal is our collective parting of the Red Sea that will resurrect the American dream. A new world is possible. My last name is Lovell. Lovell is my dad's side of the family, and they're not Jewish. They're of English and German ancestry. Lovell means the wolf. Lovell is also the name of Captain James Lovell, of course, Apollo 13. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt. Onwards and upwards.